All right, everybody, buckle up because I just finished watching what might have been the most intricate, mind-bending episode of NBA Today I've seen all season, and I need to break down everything that went down because the Lakers' trade deadline situation just got exponentially more complicated and potentially way more interesting than anyone anticipated. We're talking about multi-team trades, salary cap gymnastics, and roster construction strategies that had me rewinding the show multiple times just to make sure I was understanding all the moving pieces correctly. This isn't your typical Lakers need help conversation. This is advanced-level front office chess, and the panel on NBA Today was laying out scenarios that could legitimately reshape 3 different franchises simultaneously. So here's how this whole thing started on the show. The crew began by discussing 2 separate situations that seemed completely unrelated on the surface. But as they kept talking, you could see how these puzzle pieces might actually fit together in this massive, interconnected trade web. First, they were breaking down the Phoenix Suns salary cap nightmare. Phoenix is literally right up against the luxury tax threshold, and they need to shed about $400,000 just to get under the tax and avoid the repeater penalties that would absolutely destroy their financial flexibility going forward. $400,000 might not sound like much, but when you're operating in the second apron with all these new restrictions the league implemented, every dollar matters. Hey, what's up everyone? Before we dive in, I need 1 second of your time. That like button right there. Hitting it now makes a massive difference in reaching more fans with this content. I know you're ready for the breakdown, but real quick, just smash that like button. It's the single most powerful way to support this channel and help the algorithm push this to thousands more people. Every like matters, so do me that favor right now. The Suns have been shopping Nick Richards, their backup center who's making about $5 million this season, and they're basically willing to give him away for nothing, just to clear that cap space. The NBA Today panel was comparing it to what Toronto's doing with Ochai Agbaji, where the Raptors are actually attaching a second-round pick to Agbaji just to get teams to take him off their books because they need to clear a couple million in salary. That's how desperate these teams are to manipulate their cap situation. And that desperation creates opportunities for teams like the Lakers, who have the flexibility to absorb contracts. Then the show pivoted to the Brooklyn Nets. And this is where things got really fascinating. The Nets are in full asset accumulation mode. They're not trying to win games. They're not trying to compete for the playoffs. They're trying to collect as many draft picks, young players, and future assets as humanly possible, while also maintaining maximum salary cap flexibility. Brooklyn wants to be the facilitator in every trade, the 3rd or 4th or 5th team that helps other teams get deals done in exchange for picks and players and whatever else they can extract. They're essentially positioning themselves as the NBA's premier trade broker. And according to the reporting that NBA Today was referencing, they're open for business with basically everyone. Now, here's where the panel started connecting these dots in ways that honestly blew my mind. They laid out this entire theoretical framework for how the Lakers could simultaneously solve multiple roster problems by becoming the centerpiece of a 3-team trade involving Phoenix and Brooklyn. And the more they explained it, the more sense it actually made, even though the complexity level is absolutely insane. Let's start with the Lakers side of things, because understanding what they need is crucial to appreciating why this trade architecture might actually work. The panel was very clear about this. The Lakers are desperate for rotation players who can contribute immediately. They don't need projects. They don't need guys who might develop in 2 or 3 years. They need players who can step into meaningful minutes right now and help LeBron and AD compete for a championship this season. But the problem is, the Lakers have almost no trade assets. They've got 1 first-round pick they can move. They've got a bunch of pick swaps that most teams don't value, and they've got a roster full of expiring contracts that individually aren't worth much. So the show started breaking down how the Lakers could leverage their expiring contracts. Guys like Gabe Vincent, Rui Hachimura, Max Christie, Dalton Knecht, as salary-matching tools in a bigger trade rather than trying to move them individually for minimal return. This is where the 3-team structure becomes essential. because no single team wants all of the Lakers' expiring contracts. But if you can distribute them across multiple teams as part of a larger deal, suddenly you're creating value where none existed before. Here's the basic framework they outlined on NBA Today, and I'm going to walk through this step by step, because it's genuinely brilliant in its complexity. The Lakers would send Dalton Knecht directly to Phoenix as the salary match for Nick Richards. Knecht makes about $4 million, Richards makes $5 million, and the Lakers have just enough room under the luxury tax to absorb that extra $1 million without completely destroying their own cap situation. That's transaction number one, and it's relatively straightforward. Phoenix gets a young shooting guard with upside who they can evaluate for the future. The Lakers get a legitimate backup center who can protect the rim and rebound, and Phoenix clears the $400,000 they desperately need to get under the tax. But here's where it gets wild. The panel explained that the Lakers couldn't just do that deal in isolation because of how the roster spots work. If you trade one player for one player straight up, you're fine. But if you're trying to acquire multiple players in different deals, you run into roster limitations. The Lakers only have 15 roster spots, and if you're trading away one guy but bringing back 3 or 4, the math doesn't work unless you're also sending out additional players to balance the roster count. This is the kind of minutia that casual fans never think about, but it's absolutely critical to understanding why these deals have to be structured the way they are. So the solution they proposed on NBA Today was to simultaneously loop in the Brooklyn Nets as the team that absorbs the Lakers' expiring contracts and sends back multiple rotation players. The Nets don't care about taking on expiring deals because they're not trying to compete anyway. And if they can extract draft picks or young players in exchange for facilitating the trade, they're happy to do it. Meanwhile, the Lakers get to consolidate 4 or 5 mediocre expiring contracts into 2 or 3 actual contributors who can help them win games. The specific players they mentioned from Brooklyn were absolutely fascinating, and the panel really got into why each guy makes sense for what the Lakers need. First name that kept coming up was Ziaire Williams. Williams is this 6'8" wing who was a lottery pick a few years ago, super athletic, can defend multiple positions, still young enough that he's got upside, but also NBA ready enough that he could contribute immediately in a playoff rotation. He's making about $8 million this season, which makes him easy to match salary-wise, and the Nets apparently aren't attached to him long-term, so they'd be willing to move him for the right price. The other Brooklyn player they kept discussing was Haywood Highsmith. Wait, no, actually, I think I'm mixing up my notes here, because Highsmith is with Miami, not Brooklyn. Let me make sure I'm getting this right based on what they actually said on the show. They were talking about Cam Thomas from Brooklyn, who's this bucket-getter scoring guard making around $8 million. Thomas can absolutely light it up offensively, but he's a free agent after this season, so he's essentially a rental, which lowers his trade value significantly. The panel was debating whether the Lakers would even want Thomas given that he's probably going to leave in free agency anyway, but the counter-argument was that if you're going all in for this season with LeBron and AD, you don't care about next year. You care about maximizing your chances right now. Then they brought up Day'Ron Sharpe, who's been absolutely balling out for Brooklyn this season as their starting center. Sharpe is young, he's athletic, he's a monster on the boards, and he's shown legitimate defensive potential protecting the rim. The problem is the Nets apparently value Sharpe pretty highly and would want significant compensation to move him, which is why the panel was suggesting maybe you pivot away from Sharpe and focus on the other role players who the Nets are more willing to part with. But here's where the NBA Today crew really started cooking with the trade proposal. They suggested that maybe you could expand this even further and loop in Sacramento and Golden State, because both of those teams are trying to figure out their own situations with Malik Monk, Keon Ellis, and Jonathan Kuminga. The Kings and Warriors have been in talks for weeks about a potential Kuminga trade, but they can't seem to find common ground. The Warriors don't want to take back Malik Monk's long-term contract. Sacramento doesn't want to give up too much for a player who might not even fit their timeline, and it's just been this stalemate. So the panel floated this absolutely insane scenario where you get 4 teams involved. The Lakers send their expiring contracts to Brooklyn, Dalton Knecht to Phoenix, and maybe throw in a second-round pick or 2 to grease the wheels. Phoenix sends Nick Richards to the Lakers. Brooklyn sends multiple rotation players to the Lakers. They specifically mentioned potentially getting both Ziaire Williams and one other piece. Then you loop in Sacramento and Golden State, where Sacramento acquires Kuminga, Golden State gets something they want from the multi-team trade, and the Lakers potentially grab Malik Monk and Keon Ellis from Sacramento as part of the deal. Now, the Malik Monk part is fascinating because the panel really got into why Monk makes so much sense for the Lakers, despite the fact that most teams don't want to touch his contract. Monk is making about $19 million this season with multiple years left. And for a lot of teams, that's just too much money to commit to a sixth man who's undersized defensively and has some consistency issues. But for the Lakers specifically, Monk could be perfect. He can create his own shot, he can run the pick and roll, he can shoot threes, he can provide instant offense when LeBron sits, and the Lakers desperately need another ball handler and shot creator beyond just LeBron and AD. Keon Ellis is the other Sacramento piece they kept mentioning, and I've got to say, the more they talked about Ellis on the show, the more excited I got about the possibility. Ellis is this defensive-minded guard who can legitimately lock people up. He's on a minimum contract, so he's basically free from a salary perspective, and he's exactly the type of 3-and-D role player that championship teams need. The problem is, Sacramento barely plays him, which is mind-boggling given how good he looked in limited minutes last season. The Kings apparently want to move him because they don't have room in their rotation. And for the Lakers, he could be an absolute steal. So let me try to piece together the full trade package they were discussing on NBA Today, because there were like 5 different variations floated over the course of the segment. In the most expansive version, the Lakers would send out Rui Hachimura, Gabe Vincent, Max Christie, and Dalton Knecht. They'd receive back Nick Richards from Phoenix, Malik Monk and Keon Ellis from Sacramento, and Ziaire Williams from Brooklyn. That's trading 4 players who are either expiring or not really contributing consistently, and getting back 4 players who address specific needs. Richards gives you rim protection and rebounding. Monk gives you shot creation and playmaking. Ellis gives you perimeter defense. And Williams gives you wing depth and versatility. The salary math on this is absolutely critical, and the panel really got into the weeds on how this would work under the current CBA restrictions. The Lakers would be taking back about $37 million in salary, 5 from Richards, 19 from Monk, 3 from Ellis, 8 from Williams, which is more than they're sending out. But they have just enough room under the luxury tax apron to absorb that difference without triggering the hard cap. It's incredibly tight, like we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of wiggle room, but it technically worked. For Phoenix, they're getting a young player in Knecht who could develop into a rotation piece, and more importantly, they're shedding $5 million in salary, which gets them under the tax and saves ownership tens of millions in luxury tax payment. That's a huge win for them, even if Knecht never becomes more than a bench player. For Brooklyn, they're accumulating expiring contracts that give them flexibility, plus whatever draft compensation gets thrown in, probably a couple of second-round picks at minimum, maybe more, depending on how the negotiation goes. The Nets can then either flip those expirings again before the deadline for more assets, or they just let them expire and have max cap space this summer to take on bad contracts from other teams in exchange for more picks. It's asset accumulation 101, and it's exactly what Brooklyn wants to be doing in their current rebuild phase. For Sacramento and Golden State, if they get looped in, Sacramento finally gets their guy in Kuminga without giving up too much. And the Warriors get to move on from a player who clearly doesn't fit their system anymore, while maybe picking up an expiring contract or a future pick or whatever compensation makes sense for them. Now, the panel was very realistic about how difficult it would be to actually execute a trade this complex. They talked about how even simple 2-team trades often fall apart because teams can't agree on valuations or someone gets cold feet at the last minute. When you're coordinating 4 teams with dozens of moving pieces, the difficulty level increases exponentially. You need all four front offices to agree simultaneously. You need the league office to approve all the salary matching. You need to make sure no team is getting hard-capped in a way that destroys their flexibility going forward. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while blindfolded. But the counter-argument they made, and this really stuck with me, is that sometimes the complexity itself is what allows deals to happen. When you've got this many moving pieces, you can usually find a way to give each team enough of what they want that everyone says yes. Phoenix gets tax relief, Brooklyn gets assets, Sacramento gets Kuminga, Golden State gets closure on a bad situation, and the Lakers get multiple rotation upgrades. Nobody gets everything they want, but everybody gets something, and that's often what it takes to get deals across the finish line. The panel also discussed a simpler version of this trade that just involves the Lakers, Suns, and Nets. In this scenario, you cut out Sacramento and Golden State entirely and just focus on the Lakers consolidating their expiring contracts into Brooklyn role players while simultaneously grabbing Nick Richards from Phoenix. The salary matching gets easier. There are fewer complications, but you also get less total value back because you're only dealing with 2 trade partners instead of 4. In this simpler version, they suggested maybe the Lakers target someone like Dorian Finney-Smith from Brooklyn instead of Ziaire Williams, or maybe you try to get Royce O'Neal, who's another veteran 3-and-D wing. The Nets have a bunch of these kind of interchangeable role players who are solid contributors, but not franchise cornerstone, and they'd probably be willing to move any of them for the right package of expirings and pick. One thing the show really emphasized, and I think this is crucial for understanding the Lakers' strategy, is that Rob Pelinka needs to prioritize roster construction over asset preservation. What I mean by that is, the Lakers can't be afraid to give up second-round picks or young players or whatever else it takes to actually get the deal done, because their window with LeBron and AD is closing fast. You're not going to win a championship by hoarding second-round picks. You win by putting the best possible roster around your stars and going for it while you have the chance. The panel also got into the opportunity cost of not making moves. If the Lakers stand pat at the deadline and just run it back with the same roster that's been mediocre all season, what's the realistic ceiling? Probably a first-round playoff exit, maybe second round if everything breaks right. But if you can add 3 or 4 rotation players who address specific weaknesses, rim protection, perimeter defense, shot creation, wing depth, suddenly you're talking about a team that could legitimately compete in a playoff series against Denver or Oklahoma City or whoever comes out of the West. What really got me excited watching NBA Today break all this down was how realistic it actually feels despite the complexity. These aren't pie-in-the-sky fantasy trades where you're imagining the Lakers somehow landing Kevin Durant or Giannis. These are actual role players who are actually available and whose salaries actually match, and whose teams actually have motivation to move them. It's grounded in reality in a way that most trade speculation just isn't. The Nick Richards piece specifically makes so much sense for the Lakers' immediate need. They've been getting destroyed on the boards all season. They have no interior presence when AD sits, and Richards gives them exactly what they're missing. He's not a star, he's not going to change the trajectory of the franchise, but he's a solid backup center who can protect the rim and clean up the glass and not be a complete liability offensively. For a team with championship aspirations, having a competent backup center is absolutely essential, and the Lakers just don't have that right now. The potential addition of guys like Malik Monk or Ziaire Williams or Keon Ellis, any combination of those types of players, gives the Lakers depth they desperately need. Right now, if anyone in the starting lineup gets hurt or gets in foul trouble, the drop-off to the bench is massive. You're going from LeBron and AD to guys who just can't compete at that level. But if you can add 3 or 4 players who are legitimate NBA rotation guys, suddenly you've got actual depth. You can withstand injuries better. You can rest your stars without completely falling apart. The show also touched on something that I think doesn't get discussed enough, which is the psychological impact of the trade deadline on team. If the Lakers make aggressive moves and show LeBron and AD that the front office is all in on competing for a championship this year, that sends a message. It shows commitment. It builds confidence. It creates momentum. Conversely, if they stand pat and don't address the obvious roster deficiencies, that sends the opposite message. It tells your stars that management isn't willing to do whatever it takes to win, and that can be incredibly demoralizing. The clock is ticking. We're less than 3 weeks away from the February 6th trade deadline, and all these dominoes need to fall in exactly the right order for a multi-team mega trade to actually happen. Phoenix needs to finalize their tax-saving strategy. Brooklyn needs to identify which assets they want to target. Sacramento and Golden State need to figure out their Kuminga situation, and the Lakers need to orchestrate all of it while also managing their own cap situation and roster construction. The NBA Today panel kept emphasizing that Rob Pelinka needs to be working the phones constantly right now, exploring every possible avenue, being creative with trade structures and salary matching. The traditional two-team trade framework probably isn't going to work for the Lakers given their asset limitations, so they need to think bigger, be willing to facilitate complex multi-team deals, and find ways to create value where none currently exist. What struck me most watching the show was how much this trade deadline could define the Lakers' season and potentially even LeBron's legacy. If they get this right, if they actually pull off something like what was discussed on NBA Today, they could transform themselves from a play-in team into a legitimate championship contender. The West is wide open this year. Denver has been inconsistent. Oklahoma City is young and inexperienced in the playoffs. Phoenix has their own chemistry issue. There's a real path to a championship if the Lakers can just get the roster construction right. But if they whiff on this, if they make conservative moves, or no moves at all, we're probably looking at another disappointing playoff exit and LeBron potentially leaving in the offseason to try to chase one more ring somewhere else. The stakes couldn't be higher, and watching NBA Today lay out these intricate trade scenarios really drove home just how critical these next few weeks are going to be. The three-team trade framework involving Phoenix and Brooklyn feels like the most realistic path forward, even though the complexity is daunting. You've got willing trade partners, you've got players who address real needs, you've got salary matching that actually works under the CBA, and you've got alignment of incentives where every team gets something valuable. Now it's just a matter of execution, of Rob Pelinka proving he can pull off high-wire front office gymnastics when it matters most. I'm genuinely fascinated to see how this plays out over the next couple weeks. The foundation for a major trade is clearly there based on everything discussed on NBA Today. The question is whether the Lakers have the creativity and aggressiveness to actually get it done, or whether they'll play it safe and miss their window. Time will tell, but man, after watching that episode, I'm more convinced than ever that a Lakers-Suns-Nets three-way trade could be exactly what all three franchises need right now.